Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think it's good afternoon. It's certainly good afternoon as we're recording it. My name is Nick Boles. I used to be a Conservative MP. I then ceased to be a Conservative MP and became an independent MP. And then I ceased to be an MP altogether. And I am now the chairman of the advisory board of Ecologi, and I'll be chairing this panel. Crista, could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. My name is Crista Buznea. I'm head of social and community at Ecologi, a newcomer to the team, but my background is in sustainable marketing and responsible tourism. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Zina.
Sure. My name is Zina. I work for Intrepid Travel. I'm their managing director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Have been in the travel industry for the past 10 years, and you might know Intrepid, but it's the largest travel carbon neutral, and I guess that's why I'm here today.
Fantastic. We're all longing to start traveling again. I think we can all agree on that. Elliot.
Hi, I'm Elliot Coad, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Ecologi, the climate change subscription service to halt and reverse the kind of worst effects of our climate issue. And we're hosting It's Time, but really enjoying being on here, having to be able to contribute a little bit. Thank you.
Fantastic. And the one who probably needs no introduction, but I'm quite curious to hear how he will introduce himself. Rob.
Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Rinder. I'm a barrister, TV presenter. Some people know my daytime show or programs I make on BBC about history, and also a columnist in the Evening Standard and The Sun.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And we are the last panel in the It's Time Festival. And there's been a huge range of perspectives offered and different kinds of events over the last 2 days. But I wanted to start, in a sense, right at the beginning of the journey for all of us by asking the panel, who was the person who first brought you to the understanding that climate change, that man-made climate change was a real problem and was probably the biggest thing that we needed to grapple in the world today? And Rob, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Nick. You know, I have to start. I would say it's useful when I used to do criminal defense, just start with your confession and move forward. And so that's how I'm going to begin. I'm unashamed to say that I'm late to the party, and I'm unashamed because I didn't know the information and I didn't understand enough. And your question is such an important one because there was a critical person that held my hand and helped me, conscripted me into having that aha moment. Very briefly, I was worried and still remain worried that the language and discussions around climate change and environmentalism and consequent ecology in general has somehow been shaped, crafted, or delivered through the prism of privilege. It's very hard to persuade people why we should care about it. And some of the interlocutors, those who speak on behalf of climate change, I think are not necessarily the best advocates to persuade those most affected by climate change why it's important. So it's an interesting story because in my case, I live in the middle of Islington, central London, and in the midst of lots of expensive housing, there's lots of social housing, and I know my neighbour, and she's somebody who loves local wildlife. And although I was never a climate change denier or anything of that sort, it just, as I say, hadn't featured on my mental Rolodex of things chiefly to be concerned about when there were so many other things that I felt were higher up the list until lockdown. And my neighbour started to show me in the way that she can, with such profound eloquence, magic and enthusiasm, the different birds in our local park as our local spaces became more and more important. And she, of course, told me the migration of those birds and how many of them had disappeared. And then I started becoming curious. And then she mentioned that in 2019, it was the warmest year on record. And then, as ever, curious as I was, I went down the YouTube and reading rabbit hole. And I had that epiphany moment. And I realized that the universe had conspired to send her to me to understand just how important it was. I hadn't thought about even my local area and how magical that green space was, and that its local ecology was disappearing before my eyes, and what a privilege it was that I had it in the first place. But I didn't think about that until lockdown and when I needed it.
Oh, that is a fantastic story. And I think it's very often the case that there is that one individual who might not be a famous individual or an influential one, but who is the key person who switches on the switch. Zina, how did it happen for you? Obviously, I suspect rather earlier than it happened for me or Rob.
Well, I don't know if that's earlier, but the truth is that I started my career in finance and auditing in Paris. I was working for a big firm, and I'm from Morocco. And at some stage, I decided to go back home. It was in 2010, and it's the year where Intrepid Travel has become the largest carbon neutral company. And I've joined Intrepid Travel that year as a finance manager. And until that time, I had no clue what carbon neutral means, really. But as a finance manager, one of my jobs was to measure our mission as an office, a very small, tiny office in Morocco, and realized after we achieved that neutrality that we were the only travel company, not just in the world, but in Morocco, that had achieved that. And I started to get my head around this topic more and more, and realized that if this wasn't driven by one person who is the co-founder of Intrepid, Darrell Wade, who is an extremely passionate person about climate change, global warming, and someone who's passionate about proving the world that travel can be done in a sustainable manner. So if it wasn't because of him, I think myself and a lot of people in our business wouldn't know about this topic at all. So I feel I came quite late to the party, but it was definitely while starting with my career with Intrepid.
Fantastic. I mean, I think what's encouraging is, in a sense, how many people are joining the party, even now, who weren't there before. Bernadette.
Hello.
Hello there. I wonder if you could just very briefly introduce yourself to the panel. The rest of the panel have done so already, but it'd be great just to have one line on you.
I've been an environmental campaigner for 35 years. I've written more than a dozen books and reports from everything from water quality and pollution to chocolate. The latest is about all sorts of ways that you can be practical in your environmental action.
Well, that's fascinating, and it actually makes a very good counterpoint, because we've just been hearing from members of the panel about how they are relatively recently converted to, in a sense, the importance of climate change. Obviously, it sounds like you've been aware of it and active in it for a very long time. How did you first become aware of it? Was there a particular person who switched you on?
Yes, I was thinking about that the last few days. Jeffrey Lean was the environment correspondent for The Observer for, I think, 30, 40 years. And I did some work with him on forestry and the way that we were using pulp and paper and its polluting effects about 30 years ago. He has had an enormous influence on me, and he told us really clearly for years and years and years. And of course, it's taken our consciousness en masse to wake up to it. But because I was in that job, I was reading what he was writing and working with him. Also a book called The Greenhouse Effect, which was published in 1989 by Stuart Boyle, who was then my partner, and John Ardell from The Guardian. And I proofread that book 31 years ago. And it was so horrific and stunning that I cried. And I couldn't believe, in my mind, I couldn't believe that people wouldn't have woken up more 30 years later, 31 years later.
Well, it's very good to hear from you in this discussion, because the festival opened, of course, with an introduction by the Prince of Wales, who probably is as early an adopter and early an understander of the importance of this as you, Bernadette, and has set an example for well on 30, 40 years. So the rest of us have got some work to do to catch up. Elliot, if I may, I'm going to ask you to start us off on the next question, which is that, of course, Joe Biden has recently been declared as president-elect and will be taking office on January the 20th. And of course, he's already said that he's going to be rejoining the climate change agreement, the Paris Agreement, and presumably participating in the next UN climate change conference next year in a rather more proactive way, perhaps, than would have been the case if his opponent had won. So I was really wanted you to just set out for us, what should we be hoping for and expecting from that climate change conference next year?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, thank God for that, because another 4 years of not having that kind of sentiment is just unimaginably difficult for us, and just makes an already difficult task even just like borderline impossible when you have the US as one of the biggest emitters and have such potential to make change. But yeah, the climate change conference, so COP26 for next year. So I hope everyone's doubling down on their targets, but also like running this event and then others. I hope that we're kind of maybe inspiring COP26 to take maybe a leaf out of more kind of grassroots, out the book for the grassroots, where we have proper stakeholders involved. You know, climate change affects everyone, but mostly those who are affected on the ground in those local communities. I'd love to see just kind of more representation out there in COP26, the climate conference. Be magnificent to have this kind of cross-section that we've been able to essentially kind of magnificently cobble together over the last 2 or 3 months. So yeah, that's what I'd be really looking forward to seeing, to kind of a more truer, authentic representation of climate action.
And Zina, do you have a particular wish list, as it were, as somebody, you know, operating, running a business, trying to provide zero carbon travel solutions?
Yeah, something we've been talking about a lot since the beginning of this pandemic is that there is a lot of hopes that there will be a vaccine very soon coming to sort out this problem. There won't be a vaccine for climate change. So having the US coming on board is critical, and we're hopeful for their plan. It's a very ambitious plan that the Biden has, and I feel that for this conference we need to see more collaboration between private and public sectors, but as well as engagement from people. Businesses can achieve a lot. As part of, we are a B Corp company, we're the largest travel B Corp, and as part of that, we have 800 B Corp organizations that are committed to net zero by 2030. So collaboration is possible, and I think this type of platform are great for enabling that. So very hopeful as well, and looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Crista, because of your position, I wonder if you could tell us what are the small individual changes that you are hoping that people like me and Rob and Zina and Elliot will be embracing. I suspect that Bernadette has already embraced them all, but what are the small changes that we can make in our behavior and in our lives that will make the most difference? Because of course, you know, we can lobby governments and all of that, but none of us are ministers and none of us have political power. What can we do at home, as it were, in our own lives?
Yeah, it's a big question, and you're absolutely right. I mean, everyone has different agendas, different lifestyles, and I think what we've seen throughout this festival is there are so many options for people out there to embrace when it comes to their weekly shopping, for example, in terms of spending more time in local markets, and you know, getting deliveries at home is perhaps not the most sustainable option. So analyzing what are your purchasing decisions during your week, and what can you change? Looking at sustainable banking, for example, which is something that I've done this year for the first time. I changed my bank. Looking at, you know, the pension ahead, is that money going into a sustainable fund? Christmas is coming up. Lots of people will be investing in presents. There are so many good options out there in terms of physical gifts, eco gifts, but also virtual gifts. So it's about taking a step back, looking at where you're investing your money and what are the choices that you make in your life, and figuring out how you can make better decisions. And I think that throughout this festival, we've had so many great examples. They're all going to go up on YouTube. So feel free to revisit them and get as much inspiration as possible, and then take action.
Fantastic. Call to arms. Bernadette, you've just written a book on this subject, so I imagine you've got a few for us to note down and take away.
Well, yeah, there are about 800 ideas in the book for what you can do. So there's no shortage. So what I think you have to do is start somewhere and commit yourself to the planet and say, I want to be an earth steward, I want to be an earth protector, I want to say yes and love the earth somehow. And whether you're interested in gardening and the earth and being a steward of what's growing and live, or protesting and arguing in law, there are so many different ways that you can do things and get involved and make your voice heard. Coming back to your immediate question, your earlier actual question was about the election and Joe Biden getting in and the UN climate achievements. It's a relief, really, that America is now on side, because they're a huge juggernaut. And once they decide to do something as a nation, they can really change things and really make a difference. And so that's very exciting. What I would like people to concentrate more about and think about is species extinction, which of course there is no vaccine for. Species extinction and biodiversity loss is at such a critical stage in our nature right now. Today, we've lost already 90% of the bee species on Earth. If you do something about it, please think of how you're affecting species and your life. In the book, I've tried to cover the complexity of everything from eating animals to spreading animals on your eyes or with lipstick or using them or wearing them. But altogether, species extinction is going to hit us big time very soon if we don't have an understanding of it as a crisis. Go and read the State of the Earth report or the IPCC report and get all the facts there. The United Nations have been working on this for a very long time. So I'm excited, and yet what a massive challenge we actually face.
I mean, I'm very interested by this, Bernadette, because one of the questions, I'm very new to this, as like Rob, I really only started committing to this as the main cause that I want to be involved with in the last few months. And one of the first people I approached completely out of the blue was Elliot, because I heard about Ecologi. Actually, my niece was one of the early subscribers to Ecologi. And I got in touch with Elliot. And one of the questions I asked quite early on was there any kind of tension between action on climate change and action on the broader range of environmental issues, whether the oceans and the health of the oceans, or the health of species and biodiversity. And you'll be pleased to hear that Elliot said, no, there is absolutely no tension. The question I guess I have for you, Elliot, though, is are there ever any difficult choices? Are there any moments where we say, actually, we need to do this for the climate, even if that's not perhaps totally straightforward on other issues?
Absolutely. Yeah, if there were the straightforward silver bullet solutions, we'd be over the hill by now. As an organization that helps plant a lot of trees, it's fraught with danger, but that's not to say we shouldn't do it. Like protecting existing forests, like prime rainforests and other biomes, that's fraught with danger, but it also means that it's not to say we shouldn't support it, and we shouldn't be afraid of saying, 9 in 10 worked, but maybe that 1 in 10 didn't. But that's not a reason to stop things. Yeah, so it's massively important. And as Bernadette was saying about kind of our ecological issue being massively important, I love the opportunity that restoring nature has, where you're restoring both biodiversity, restoring nature, but also they're the best carbon sinks. So they're, these trees and grasslands and coastal systems, they're the best things for taking the CO2 out in the atmosphere. Not these like giant air conditioning units that are sucking in CO2 on a very small scale and very expensively. We have the ability to do it, and it's ultimately backing nature in a really big way. Yeah, so it's difficult, but we do get this lovely 2-for-1 bonus when we get behind nature.
We should try it all. Rob's told us a very wonderful story about how he'd been switched on to climate change as an issue by his next door neighbour, who was a local environmental campaigner. And I guess, Rob, it's perhaps unfair because I haven't warned you of this, but I was going to ask you, now that you are switched on, what do you think are the most effective ways that you, with your position, can can switch other people on, because of course we're all a bit nervous of, we don't want to be that bore at the dinner who never stops talking about it, or we don't want to be virtue signalers sort of showing off about how, you know, we're doing so much. But on the other hand, we do want to get out there.
That's a really thoughtful question, if I can say, and it's a privilege to listen to everybody. I'm going to be reading your book, Bernadette. 80 sounds like a lot of things to do.
800.
I think if those of you, 800, goodness me, those of us that watched the Sir David Attenborough program, you know, I started it and I was quite worried about the journey it was taking me on, not least because it felt depressing. And as many of you know, I make documentaries on the BBC and try to include the broadest coalition of an audience as I possibly can. And I think one of the challenges we have is that the way in which we communicate to our fellow citizens, to our neighbours, to people within our community, is often through the prism of catastrophe. And especially when it comes to climate change, that's a really special problem, because it makes people feel either fatalistic, indifferent, or it makes them not want to act. The end of Sir David Attenborough's programme, of course, was enormously powerful because it offered up at the end of his witness statement, which is a very useful way to put it, a range of things like your book, Bernadette, that we can do, small changes that we can make. And I think that enabling people to feel positive, optimistic, is the best way to ensure that they feel empowered. And so I want us to be having conversations really which include the broadest range of people as possible. As I said at the start of this, one of my worries is twofold. Firstly, yes, it's great news that Biden is back on board and America has signed up to the Paris Accords, but let's not forget, Nick used the words virtue signaling. They were signed up before, and actually CO2 emissions did not go down. So it's an important thing for the world. It's an important expression of intent, but we need more than intent. And the other thing that really matters is that I often fear that, and this is a special issue now, given we're about to face the largest economic catastrophe potentially in a century. Some of you will know I'm an ambassador for shelter, and there are approaching 1.5 million people in rent crisis, that we need to be able to ensure and communicate with people that really don't necessarily understand why this should be at the center of the things that they need to worry about. And I think there are all sorts of positive, small micro ways that we can engage local people. As you said, Nick, I started this because of the birds in the park that I hadn't looked at, because I hadn't been aware of the privilege of having green space near me. Could be because, as Bernadette describes, it's about starting thinking about bees, etc. But I want to make sure that we include the broadest range of people. And I do worry sometimes that climate change conferences, celebrities, especially those from the upper A-list jazz-handed sections of our society, do more harm than good in articulating the type of message that we really want, that this is all our shared mission, and that we are all, as Bernadette describes, shared stewards of our planet.
Beautifully put, Rob. That you have almost exactly defined what Elliot and I first talked about on a very hot day on a grassy knoll in a park in Bristol as what we wanted to achieve with this festival. So it's positive, practical action rather than doom and gloom. For all that the doom and gloom might be justified, it's not the doom and gloom that's going to get us out of this. And it leads us, in a sense, I think, neatly into our final question, which I'm going to ask all of you to contribute something to, and start with you, Zina, which is that famously, obviously, Martin Luther King said that he had a dream, and it became one of the most powerful clarion calls for change that the world has ever seen. What is your dream about the next 10, 20, 30 years? That when when you're reaching my age, what would you like the world to be like in a way that it isn't now in this area?
I'm glad that Rob has mentioned the movie or the documentary of David Attenborough, because toward the end of it, as one of the solutions he's talking about, which is a very unknown or not very known solution around for climate change, which is around educating women and girls. So it's not extremely straightforward or known, but the reality is that our booming population is putting pressure on the planet. And we know for sure now that if we educate girls and empower women to become independent financially and get married later and have kids later or less kids, it will have a positive impact on the planet. And as a very big advocate of women empowerment, I myself is an ambassador of a very good association called Education for All that gives girls from rural areas in Morocco, for example, to access schools, while in general, 80% of them would be illiterate and married at 16 years old. I feel that this would be my dream, is that we provide universal education to all the kids, because it can have a very powerful impact on the protection of our planet as part of the solution. There are many solutions, but this one will be mine. And it's one that is not very famous or not very straightforward, but it's a very powerful one, I would say.
That's a great perspective. So let's go to Elliot.
Yes, so I cannot wait for the moment to come when so it's a dream for now, but it will have to happen, where we enter this moment where we give more back to the planet than we take. And it'll be a defining moment, like unlike anything else, where all of humanity up until this point has been take, destroy, burn, take. And it's just, that just categorizes all of our time on this planet up until now, from all the millennia. And then there'll be a moment where we just kind of bend over or go over the hill and we start planting more than we cull or chop down, and we start restoring, taking more greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere than we put in. And it's just this just wonderful moment, because it's going to be a hell of a hard job to get us there, but well worth the fight, where we just have this kind of moment where, yeah, it is this kind of epoch moment, and there's something to really look forward to on the journey through despair and everything. It's going to get hairy, but what a wonderful thing to kind of come out on the other side of, just to then be in a point of we're just rebuilding better, essentially.
And I think that's a very inspiring vision. I was sort of thinking of it in terms of a net zero life. That
yeah,
we all aim, we accept that parts of our lives and certain things we do will have impacts, will draw resources, but that we aim to have a net zero life, so that in the totality of our life, we put more back in than we've taken out. I don't know enough of the science of all this to know how far away that is for most of us. I suspect quite far. But I think it's worthy.
But the rate of change is really good. As we were just saying, some late bloomers, late people to the party here. That rate of change is really to understand and to have, to set out good expectations for this kind of process of healing. So things are coming along nicely if we can carry on getting behind it.
Bernadette, I'm going to come to you at the end. So Crista, what do you have from a generational perspective that, let's say, charitably is different than mine and Rob's?
Sure. So I also have dreams, if I'm allowed to share too. One is that people listen to each other more. I think we're in a period right now where there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of desire to speak, and that's all well and good, but I think especially when there's such divisions in society and different perspectives and different ambitions and different priorities, actually getting to listen to each other more, I think, is a real solution. It's a real step towards a solution to solving some of the big problems that we have. And then the other big dream I have is a shift in the types of power that are used in the world. So there are three types of power. Power over, which is the type of stereotypical power that we've seen in governments, where, we are told this is what you need to do. There's power with, let's do this together, let's empower each other, let's have a mission, let's work on this together. This festival has been about power with all of these amazing speakers and activists, and let's get together and share the action and the word about everything that we're doing. And then there's power too, which is empowering other people to do the work and carry the baton forward. So changing from power over to power with and power to, I think, is a key step for the next generations to solve all of these problems. So power to everyone watching us to do that and take action moving forward.
Brilliant. Well, having given up what little power over I ever had, I entirely endorse that vision. Bernadette,
Well, first of all, I'd like to say we have a little a mantra in the environment movement, and it says you must move from ego to eco. So an eco perspective is one where you have a shared vision and you make things better, or you don't leave the world in a worse state at the very least. At the moment in our country, which is very wealthy, each person on average is using 4 planets worth of resources every year, as if we have 4 planets and we don't. So we're overusing in our capacity. So my vision is that we can have a fantastic lifestyle without the carbon and the pollution, and where transport systems are silent and they're not killing 7 million people a year as fossil fuels are in the world today. But most importantly, I envisage a world where we have more compassion for animals and other living creatures whom day by day we have a battle with, and we kill and murder on every single level continuously, to the point where they are becoming extinct because of our ego and thinking that we have charge over every single living creature. So compassion for animals is my future vision for the world. But I'm an optimist. I believe entirely that humanity will fight hard to carry on living. And even as we get closer to a serious point of no return, there are more and more solutions coming forward, and more people waking up. So in my optimism, my vision is that there, yes, is a wholesale awakening of people thinking, I got to do something. What's my MP doing? What's the company that I work for doing? What's happening in this law? What's happening with that product? There's so many ways you can do things and be involved. There's no end if you choose that you want to be a steward of the earth. And so that's what you have to choose, and then take a tiny step forward. And it is time to choose that. Your conference is aptly named. It's time, not just for climate action, but for earth action. And that includes all the animals that live with us too.
Bernadette, thank you. That was brilliant and inspiring. Rob, last word to you, sir.
Very quickly, in terms of a dream, this is a wonderful conference. And thanks for everybody that's invited me and just spoke. I must emphasize, as a newcomer, it's been educational and inspiring, and really the dream is that everybody feels, whatever their background, that they have a personal vested interest and stake in their environment, whether that's their local environment, whether it's the broader countryside, or whether it's the planet at large, but that our relationship to the planet is indistinguishable from our relationship to who we are as citizens, as neighbours, and as family members.
Thank you very much indeed. I have nothing to add to those beautiful words from all 5 of you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you everyone for attending It's Time, and thank you Ecologi for making it happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.